I'm Emily Carter, 38, founder and CEO of Summit Ridge Ventures, a private equity firm valued at $2.1 billion. The business world calls me relentless and brilliant. My family, they just call me the black sheep. After quietly building my company for over a decade, I returned to Carter Industries in Philadelphia when they desperately needed investors. My older brother Mark gave me a smug look and said, "Emily, these seats are for the real players." If only he knew what was coming next. Before I tell you what happened, when they discovered who I really was, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you enjoy stories about underestimated women rising to the top. Growing up in Philadelphia in the late 1980s, Mark, now 45, was always Dad's favorite. From toddlerhood, Dad proudly showed him off around the office as the future of Carter Industries. My other brother, Jason, 42, naturally took to client relations with his charming grin and smooth talk. Ryan, 39, was quiet and tech-savvy, but lacked the boldness Dad admired. And then there was me. I was obsessed with business from as early as I can remember. At 9, I studied Dad's annual reports at the kitchen counter while other kids played outside. By 13, I pointed out flaws in their inventory management no one else noticed. Dad would tousle my hair, call me clever girl, then quickly dismiss my ideas. "This business isn't really for girls, Emily," he said when I was 15 after I proposed expanding into biotech. That same week, Mark pitched a retail venture that lost $1.8 million, but Dad called it a valuable lesson. Despite the favoritism, I pushed forward, convinced results would speak louder. Throughout my 20s, I worked 80-hour weeks modernizing finance systems, landing our first overseas clients, and boosting my division's profits by 40%. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. On Dad's 67th birthday, he announced his succession plan. Despite my track record, degrees, and numbers, he named Mark CEO. "Carter Industries is led by a Carter man," he said without meeting my eyes. "It's tradition, Emily." I was promised an important role. That role turned out to be working under Mark, who stripped me of top clients and reassigned them to himself and Jason. The final blow was moving me out of my corner office to a cramped storage room, claiming window offices were for client-facing employees. I resigned the very next day. No dramatic confrontation, no tearful goodbye. I simply placed my resignation letter on Dad's desk before he arrived and walked out. The only person who tried to stop me was Melissa, Mark's longtime secretary, who had always treated me kindly. "They don't deserve you," she whispered as I carried a small box of my belongings to the car. "But they'll regret this someday." I didn't look back. Instead, I used my savings and a modest inheritance from Mom to start fresh. I went back to using her maiden name, Hayes, partly to avoid the nepotism accusations that had followed me through business school, but mostly so my success or failure would be entirely mine. Summit Ridge Ventures began in a cramped office with just me and 2 hungry recent graduates who believed in my vision. We specialized in identifying struggling yet fundamentally sound manufacturing businesses, offering capital and restructuring expertise to turn them around. Within 5 years, we were managing a portfolio worth over $500 million. By year 8, we crossed the billion-dollar mark and moved into sleek headquarters in Manhattan. All along, I maintained a strict rule: no one in the Carter family could know about Summit Ridge. My executive team understood that any mention of my company to them would result in immediate dismissal. I wasn't hiding out of shame. I was building something that couldn't be dismissed as luck or family connections. I followed Carter Industries from afar, through industry news and financial reports. After a strong start under Mark's leadership building on initiatives I had laid the groundwork for, the company began a steady decline. Bad investments, lost clients, outdated technology, all symptoms of leadership more focused on appearances than fundamentals. Then 3 weeks ago, I got the call that Dad had suffered a heart attack. He survived, but the event triggered a cascade of problems. Key investors pulled out after hearing about his health, creditors circled, and Carter Industries, the company Dad had built over 50 years, was weeks from bankruptcy. At first, I wanted to let it burn. They had made their choice years ago. But something, perhaps Mom's voice in my head reminding me, Family means something made me hesitate. I instructed my team to gather detailed intelligence on Carter's financial state. What they uncovered was worse than I feared. My brothers had nearly run the company into the ground with a mix of incompetence and arrogance. They were scrambling for investors to inject emergency capital. And ironically, Summit Ridge Ventures was on their short list. Not because they knew of me, but because we'd earned a reputation for turning around struggling manufacturers. When an email invitation to a Carter family business emergency meeting landed in my personal inbox, I decided to attend. Not as the CEO of Summit Ridge Ventures, but simply as Emily, the forgotten Carter daughter. I wanted to see for myself if anything was worth saving. The email from Mark's assistant was formal and cold. Your presence is requested at Carter Industries headquarters for a family business discussion on Friday, May 12th at 10 a.m. Please confirm your attendance. No, we miss you or hope you're well. Not even a personal sign-off, just a corporate summons after more than a decade of silence. I showed the message to Diane, my COO and closest confidant in my corner office overlooking Manhattan. "You're not seriously thinking of going, are you?" she asked, raising her eyebrows. After everything they'd done, I spun slowly in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. I'm curious. Curious is reading their financial statements, which we already have. This is pure masochism, Diane said, perching on the edge of my desk. They'll try to guilt you into handing over money you earned, despite them, not because of them. Maybe I admitted, but I want to see it with my own eyes. The company, Dad, everything. Diane softened. And you're going as just Emily, not as the CEO who could buy them out with your quarterly bonus. Exactly. I want to see how they treat me when they think I have nothing to offer. After confirming my attendance, I spent the week preparing emotionally for the reunion. I chose my outfit carefully, an understated charcoal pantsuit that cost more than Mark's first car, but didn't scream wealth. Minimal jewelry, just Mom's simple gold wedding band on a delicate chain around my neck. The drive back to Philadelphia was a journey through memories the roadside, where Dad always stopped for ice cream on summer trips, the high school where I was valedictorian. Yet my brother's average sports wins got more applause, the coffee shop where I drafted my resignation letter years ago. Carter Industries headquarters looked smaller than I remembered. The receptionist didn't recognize me. I had to sign in as a visitor and wait for an escort sitting on the same worn lobby chairs Dad had refused to replace, despite my protests that they gave a bad impression. Their vintage shows history, he'd said. Now, they just looked shabby. The elevator ride up was tense. I shared it with two young employees whispering about more layoffs and tomorrow's emergency investor meeting. They didn't ask who I was, and I didn't volunteer. Jason was the first brother I ran into, hurrying down the hallway with a phone pressed to his ear. He did a double take, muttered, "Gotta go into the receiver," then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily." "Wow, it's been a while." He gave me an awkward side hug. "You look corporate." "Hello, Jason." "Yes, it has been a while. 10 years, to be exact." He looked genuinely embarrassed. "Right. Well, Mark's been running around like crazy preparing for tomorrow. Big potential investors coming. Could save the whole business." He glanced at his watch. "Speaking of which, I should get going." "Don't let me keep you," I said coolly. Then Ryan appeared, stepping out from what used to be the IT department. He looked older than I expected, premature streaks of gray in his hair. Unlike Jason, he seemed genuinely glad to see me. "Emily," he gave me a real hug. "I can't believe you came. It's really good to see you." "Thanks, Ryan." "How have you been?" His smile faltered. "Oh, you know, busy. Trying to keep our systems from falling apart while the budget keeps shrinking." His voice dropped. "It's bad, Em. Worse than they're admitting." Before he could say more, Mark's voice boomed from down the hall. "Well, well, well! Little sis decides to grace us with her presence." Mark had put on weight since I last saw him. His once athletic frame was soft around the middle, and he'd lost some hair he tried to hide with a clumsy comb-over. His suit looked like it was still tailored for a decade younger version of himself. "Hey, little sis," he said. So I gathered, I replied. What's the situation? Mark waved dismissively. Nothing for you to worry about. Just a temporary cash flow issue. Once we secure this new round of funding, everything will be back on track. I caught a faint scent of whiskey on his breath at 11 a.m. Some things never change. Dad's expecting us all for dinner tonight at the house, Mark added. 6 o'clock. Don't be late, you know how he hates waiting for dinner. With that, he disappeared barking orders at a flustered assistant as he walked toward the conference room. Dad's house, the sprawling colonial where we grew up, seemed frozen in time. The same furniture, the same paintings, even the same family photos from before I left. It was as if the day I walked away had never ended. Dad looked frail, his once commanding presence diminished by age and illness. Still, when he saw me, a flicker of surprise and maybe relief sparked in his eyes. Emily, he said simply, opening his arms. I hugged him, noticing how thin he felt beneath his worn cardigan. Hi, Dad. You look successful, he observed, studying my face. I am, I replied, offering nothing more. Dinner was stiff and awkward. Mark dominated the conversation, spinning optimistic projections about tomorrow's investor meeting and Carter Industries' future once this minor setback was resolved. Jason nodded enthusiastically while Ryan pushed food around his plate. Dad said little, watching us all with tired eyes. I excused myself early, claiming jet lag, despite having only driven in from Manhattan. As I headed upstairs to my old bedroom preserved like a museum exhibit of my teenage years, I overheard Mark's voice coming from Dad's study. Summit Ridge Ventures is our best shot, he was saying. Their reps sounded interested. If they invest, the others will follow. And if they don't, Dad's voice was weaker than I'd ever heard. Don't think like that, Dad. We'll get the money, I promise. I paused outside the door, tempted to reveal myself then and there. Instead, I went to my room and sat on the edge of my childhood bed, contemplating my next move. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered downstairs for water and found my brothers deep in an impromptu strategy session in the kitchen. They fell silent as I entered. Don't stop on my account, I said, filling a glass from the tap. Just business stuff, Jason said quickly. Nothing you'd be interested in. I smiled tightly. You'd be surprised what interests me these days. After I left, I lingered in the hallway, listening. Do you think we should involve her tomorrow? Ryan asked. She always had a good head for numbers. Absolutely not, Mark replied sharply. The last thing we need is her amateur input scaring off Summit Ridge. They're our last hope. I smiled quietly to myself. I woke before dawn, my body still on my usual schedule, despite the unfamiliar surroundings. I dressed methodically, silk blouse, tailored pants, and a casual blazer to conceal the power suit beneath. I secured Mom's ring around my neck and applied minimal makeup professional, but not flashy. By 7 a.m., I was at Carter Industries watching frantic preparations from the sidelines. Staff rushed about adjusting furniture in the conference room, testing the projector, and arranging platters of pastries that looked far pricier than the company could afford. I approached Ryan, who was fiddling with the presentation laptop. Need any help? I asked as I approached Ryan, who jumped slightly. Oh, Emily? Didn't see you there? I'm pretty good with PowerPoint these days, I offered. Ryan hesitated, glancing nervously toward Mark's office. I should probably... Let me just take a look, I said, sliding into the chair beside him. The presentation was a mess, formatting all over the place, typos, key financial projections missing, and worst of all, a fundamentally flawed analysis of the company's turnaround potential. Ryan, these projected growth numbers don't line up with your current manufacturing capacity, I pointed out. And this slide about future markets contradicts the data on slide 7. Really? He frowned and looked closer. I told Mark those projections seemed optimistic, but he insisted. What's going on here? Mark appeared in the doorway, coffee cup in hand. Ryan? Why isn't the presentation ready? Mark asked. I was just helping him polish a few things, I explained. There are inconsistencies in the financials. We don't need your help, Mark snapped. He cut me off. This presentation has been vetted by actual financial professionals. I bit my tongue, knowing any defense of my skills would reveal too much. I'm just trying to contribute. The best way you can contribute is by staying out of the way, Mark said sharply. Investors arrive in an hour. We need everything perfect. Perfect was certainly not the word I'd use for their preparation. As the morning went on, I watched board members and potential investors arrive, mostly older men in conservative suits who barely glanced at me. A few nodded politely when introduced, but it was clear they saw me as irrelevant. The conference room buzzed with activity. Name placards surrounded the massive oak table names of people who apparently mattered more than me. At 9:45, 15 minutes before the start, Mark approached me as I reviewed notes near the refreshments. "Oh, Emily," he said dismissively. "We need these seats for the real stakeholders. Why don't you sit in the storage room? We'll fill you in later." My face stayed neutral, despite the sting. "Storage room," he explained impatiently. "It's been converted to a small office. There's even a chair. Melissa will show you." Jason, standing nearby, looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Ryan avoided eye contact, suddenly absorbed in his tablet. Melissa, Mark's exhausted secretary, gave me an apologetic look as she led me down the hall to what was indeed a glorified closet. A metal folding chair sat next to a dusty desk piled with old catalogs and forgotten supplies. "I'm so sorry, Miss Carter," Melissa whispered. "I tried to tell Mark this was inappropriate. But it's fine, Melissa," I assured her. "Actually, it's perfect." She looked confused but nodded, leaving me alone in the cramped space. The irony wasn't lost on me, a billionaire CEO relegated to a storage closet in the company my father had built. The room was a time capsule of Carter Industries history. Boxes of old product catalogs from the 1980s and 90s lined the walls alongside faded newspaper clippings celebrating company milestones. A dusty plaque commemorated Dad's Entrepreneur of the Year award from 1995. In one corner, I found a box labeled Family filled with old photographs. There I was at my high school graduation, standing proudly beside Dad. Another photo showed the company picnic when I was 16, holding the Employee Innovation Contest trophy for an inventory management solution still in use. And there was Mom before cancer, with a bright smile, her arm around me on my college acceptance day. The thin walls let me hear the nervous energy in the conference room. Mark's voice carried as he rehearsed his opening remarks, confidence slipping with each repetition. I caught the shuffle of papers and occasional muttered curses as last-minute tweaks were made to the presentation. Then I spotted something unexpected, a stack of recent financial documents hidden, rather than properly filed. I skimmed through them, stomach sinking. The situation was worse than even my team had uncovered. Carter Industries wasn't just struggling. It was on the verge of total collapse. Unpaid vendors missed loan payments, tax liens, a perfect storm of financial mismanagement. At 10:15, Melissa's heels clicked urgently down the hallway. She burst into the conference room. "Sir?" she called breathlessly. "Summit Ridge Ventures representatives are here?" They just pulled up in front. The room fell silent, then erupted into controlled chaos. I stood peeling off my casual blazer to reveal the sharp suit beneath. Checking my reflection in my phone's camera, I secured a stray strand of hair and squared my shoulders. Then I texted my executive team, "Enter in 5 minutes." It was time to emerge from the shadows. I stood in the storage room listening as Mark began addressing the board and potential investors. His voice carried the familiar artificial confidence, just a touch too loud, just a bit too rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us during this exciting time for Carter Industries. While we face temporary challenges, we're poised for an unprecedented comeback with the right strategic partners." Through the thin walls, I heard the rustling of presentation materials being distributed. Jason chimed in occasionally with enthusiastic affirmations, while Ryan's quieter voice explained technical details when prompted. The board members' questions grew sharper. "These revenue projections seem extremely optimistic, given your current production capabilities," one remarked. "Could you explain the discrepancy between these figures and last quarter's actual performance?" asked another. Mark's answers grew defensive, his explanations increasingly convoluted. The energy in the room shifted. I could sense the potential investors' interest fading with every unconvincing reply. Then came the moment that changed everything. The conference room door burst open. Melissa's breathless voice carried through. "Sir Summit Ridge Ventures' CEO is here." An expectant hush fell. I pictured all eyes turning toward the main entrance, waiting for the financial savior they'd pinned their hopes on. I counted to 5, took a deep breath, and opened the storage room door. The silence was absolute. 20 faces turned toward me in confusion, then shock as realization slowly dawned. Mark stood frozen mid-gesture at the head of the table, the presentation remote dangling from his hand. "Sorry I'm late," I said calmly, walking to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. I was reviewing some interesting financial documents in the storage room where I was asked to wait. Mark recovered first, his face contorted with confusion. "Emily, what are you doing here? We're in the middle of an important meeting waiting for Hayes from Summit Ridge Ventures." I smiled, sliding my business card toward the center of the table. That would be me. Emily Hayes. I reverted to my mother's maiden name when I started my company. One of the board members, Mr. Fitzgerald, who had been with the company since Dad's early days, picked up my card. His eyes widened as he read it. Emily Carter as Emily Hayes. The Emily Hayes, CEO of Summit Ridge Ventures. I nodded, pulling my company ID from my pocket and placing it beside the card. The very same. The room erupted. Jason's mouth literally hung open. Ryan stared at me with a mix of shock, and was the admiration? Board members whispered urgently among themselves, some impressed, others clearly concerned. Mark's face drained of color. "This is some kind of joke," he stammered. "You can't be." "I assure you it's not a joke," I replied evenly. Summit Ridge Ventures manages assets totaling over $3.2 billion. We specialize in manufacturing turnarounds, particularly family businesses facing succession challenges. I paused. "Sound familiar? But you've been..." "What?" "Working as an assistant somewhere all these years," Mark sputtered. "How could you possibly?" After I left Carter Industries, I founded Summit Ridge Ventures with my savings and a small inheritance from Mom. We've grown exponentially year over year for the past decade. Forbes featured me just last month, actually. The invisible billionaire they called me because of my preference for privacy. Mark tried to regain control of the room. "Everyone, let's take a short break." "Mark," I said firmly, "I need to speak with you privately." "I don't think so." I added, voice steady. "I'm here as an invited potential investor, and I'd like to continue this meeting." I turned to the board. "If that's acceptable to you." Mr. Fitzgerald nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Several others murmured agreement. "Excellent," I said, opening my portfolio. "Now I've reviewed the materials you provided to my team, as well as some additional documents I found while waiting in storage. I have several concerns I'd like to address." For the next 30 minutes, I methodically dissected the company's financial situation, pointing out the mismanagement, poor strategic decisions, and accounting irregularities that had pushed Carter Industries to the brink of bankruptcy. I was professional, but unsparing, backing every criticism with specific examples and data. The European expansion 3 years ago consumed 40% of available capital, but has yet to generate positive returns, I noted. The Miller account was lost due to repeated quality control failures that weren't addressed despite multiple warnings. And the company has been operating with outdated manufacturing technology, while the executive suite was renovated twice in 5 years. Mark's face flushed red as I spoke. When I finished, he exploded. "This is ridiculous. You come back after abandoning the family," Jason said quietly. "Maybe we should listen." "No." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's been gone. She's an outsider." Actually, Ryan interjected, surprising everyone. "Everything she said is accurate. I've been trying to raise these same issues for years." The room fell silent again. Then, from the doorway came a voice I immediately recognized. "Let her speak." Mark's father stood there looking older and frailer than at dinner, but with the commanding presence that had built Carter Industries from nothing. He walked slowly to an empty chair and nodded for me to continue. "Thank you," I said, nodding slightly to Dad before addressing the room again. Despite these challenges, Carter Industries has a solid foundation worth saving. The brand still holds value. The core product lines remain competitive, and the workforce is skilled and loyal. I laid out my proposal. Summit Ridge Ventures would provide emergency capital in exchange for a controlling interest. Leadership would be restructured with performance-based metrics deciding who stayed in management. The company would refocus on its most profitable products while modernizing manufacturing capabilities. This isn't a hostile takeover, I clarified. It's a rescue operation, but it requires acknowledging reality and accepting significant change. Mark scoffed. So you want us to hand over the company Dad built to you? After you walked away, I didn't walk away. Mark, I said steadily. I was pushed out. You moved me to a closet, much like the one you put me in today. I held his gaze without flinching. But this isn't about the past. It's about whether Carter Industries has a future. Jason, always the peacemaker, stepped in. Maybe we should consider Emily's proposal. We do need the capital, and her track record speaks for itself. Ryan nodded in agreement. The company needs help. We all know it. Mark looked to Dad clearly, expecting support as always. Dad, tell them this is crazy. We can't let an outsider take control, even if she is family. Dad was silent for a long moment, eyes heavy with fatigue as he looked between us. For 10 years, he finally said, I've watched this company decline under your leadership, Mark. I defended you, made excuses, convinced myself things would turn around. But they haven't. He turned to me. And for those same 10 years, I followed your success from afar. Read every article about Summit Ridge, tracked every acquisition, kept a file of all you've accomplished without the Carter name or connections. This revelation stunned me. He'd been watching my career all along. You were always the one with the real vision. Dad continued, the drive, the discipline. I was wrong to overlook you because of tradition or gender or whatever foolish reason I told myself. He looked around the table. We should listen to Emily. If you're captivated by Emily's journey and want to see how this family drama unfolds, don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more ahead you won't want to miss. Not because she's family, but because she's earned the right to be heard. The room fell silent as the weight of Dad's words settled over everyone. Mark looked as though he'd been struck speechless. Jason appeared relieved. Ryan wore an expression that said, finally. I kept my professional composure, though inside emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Thank you, I said simply. I'll need complete access to all financial records and operations before making a final decision. My team is waiting outside and can begin the assessment immediately. I'll require an answer on my terms within 48 hours. I stood gathering my materials. This meeting is adjourned for now. I suggest everyone take time to consider what's truly best for the company's future. As I walked out, board members and investors parted respectfully, several nodding in acknowledgement. Mark remained frozen at the head of the table, his presentation long forgotten. Jason followed me, already trying to position himself as an ally. Ryan hung back, but gave me a small thumbs up when our eyes met. At the door, Melissa waited with a smile. As I passed, she whispered, "That was badass, Ms. Hayes." Indeed it was. The Montclair Hotel's presidential suite had been transformed into Summit Ridge's temporary command center. When I entered my executive team, Diane, Marcus, and Raj looked up expectantly from their laptops. So Diane asked, searching my face, how did our little surprise go? Over I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the nearest sofa. About as well as you'd expect when you reveal to your estranged family that you're secretly a billionaire who could buy their failing company with pocket change. That good, huh? Marcus grinned. Mark looked like he was having a stroke. I admitted, feeling a mix of vindication and unexpected guilt. Dad actually defended. You said he'd been following your career all along. Seriously? Diane raised an eyebrow. The same dad who passed you over for being female? I shrugged as the emotional complexity of the day finally hit me. People are complicated. Once my team dispersed to begin their preliminary assessment, I allowed myself a quiet moment. 10 years of proving myself building something from nothing had culminated in today's revelation. The victory should have felt sweeter. My phone lit up with notifications. Mark had called 3 times. Jason sent a rambling, sycophantic text about always believing in me and being excited about our new partnership. Ryan's message was simpler. I'm sorry. You've always been the smartest one. Let me know how I can help. Dad hadn't reached out. I ignored all the missed calls and messages, staring out at the Philadelphia skyline I'd left behind a decade ago. The satisfaction I'd expected felt hollow, mixed with a complicated grief for what might have been if things had been different. An hour later, Diane found me, still lost in thought by the window. The preliminary numbers are worse than we feared, she said quietly. They've been cooking the books for at least 2 years. Classic case of hiding declining revenue with creative accounting, I murmured. Could there be criminal charges? Possibly, Diane replied. It seems more like incompetence than malice from what I can tell, but the SEC might see it differently. I nodded, distracted. What would you do? Diane, purely as a business decision. She considered carefully. Objectively, I'd walk away. There are better investment opportunities with fewer emotional complications. The Carter name isn't what it used to be. And less objectively, I asked. She sat beside me. It's your family, Emily. Despite everything, but that doesn't mean you owe them salvation, she said softly. There's a difference between forgiveness and setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. A knock at the door interrupted us. The hotel staff announced a visitor, Samuel Carter. Dad looked even more fragile amid the elegance of the suite than he had in the boardroom. He stood awkwardly in the entryway, politely declining a seat. I won't stay long, he said. I just needed to speak with you privately. Diane excused herself, leaving us alone. Impressive operation you've built, Dad observed, gesturing to the laptops and papers spread across the room. Thank you, I said, feeling an uneasy silence stretch between us. I'm sorry, Emily, he finally said. For everything. For 10 years ago. I'd imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed the accusations I would level. But faced with his genuine contrition, those words vanished. Why, I asked simply. Was it really just because I'm a woman? He shook his head ashamed. That was part of it, outdated thinking I was raised with. But mostly, it was fear. You were so much more capable than your brothers. More like me than any of them. I was afraid you'd build something better than I had, make my legacy seem small. He gave a sad laugh. And then you went and did exactly that anyway. I didn't do it to spite you, I said quietly. I know, Dad said quietly. You did it because it's who you are. A builder. A visionary. He met my eyes directly. Like I used to be before I got caught up in preserving rather than growing. Another silence stretched between us. There's something else, he said finally. Something the boys don't know yet. My health is worse than I've let on. The heart attack revealed advanced coronary disease. The doctors say I have a year, maybe 2, with aggressive treatment. The news hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, he was still my father. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, he clarified, but because I need you to understand what I'm asking. Carter Industries isn't just a company to me, it's my life's work. The thought of it disappearing, nothing left after 50 years of building. He trailed off, emotion catching his voice. You want me to save it I finished for him? No, he said. I want you to consider saving it. Not for Mark or Jason or even me, but as a legacy worth preserving, flawed though it may be. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, emotions clashing inside me. The detached CEO in me said to walk away. Carter Industries was a risky investment at best. The wounded daughter wanted to reject their desperate plea to let them face the consequences of pushing me away. But another voice whispered, Moms. She was always the compassionate balance to Dad's ruthless pragmatism. Family is family, she'd say, even when they disappoint you. I called my therapist, Dr. Levine, for an emergency session. We'd worked together for years, untangling the grief and anger I carried from family wounds. Sounds like you're at a crossroads, she observed after I explained everything. Professionally and personally. I built Summit Ridge to prove them wrong, I admitted. To show Dad he made a mistake choosing Mark over me. Now that you've done that, what's left? Her question lingered with me as I directed my team to conduct a full analysis of Carter Industries' finances. They worked through the night using passwords Ryan quietly provided, uncovering the company's full troubles. By morning, I had the complete picture, and it wasn't pretty. Years of mismanagement had left the once thriving company on life support. Multiple divisions were hemorrhaging money. Client relationships had deteriorated. Talented employees had fled to competitors. Yet beneath the dysfunction, I could still see the framework of something worth saving. The core manufacturing technology remained sound. Several product lines continued to perform well despite neglect. Most importantly, many loyal employees had stayed keeping operations alive through sheer determination. After 48 sleepless hours, I made my decision. I would help save Carter Industries, but on my terms, with clear boundaries separating family and business. 3 days after my dramatic revelation, I returned to Carter Industries with my full executive team. We arrived precisely at 9 a.m., moving through the lobby like a tactical unit. Employees whispered as we passed word of my true identity had spread throughout the company. The boardroom was ready, fresh flowers, premium coffee service, and presentation materials meticulously arranged. Mark stood stiffly near the head of the table, clearly uncertain about his place in this new reality. Jason hovered nearby, smiling too broadly. Ryan waited quietly by the projector, looking more at ease than I'd seen him in years. Board members filed in, followed by Dad, who took a seat off to the side, present, but deliberately not at the head of the table. "Good morning," I began, once everyone was seated. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting on such short notice. My team has completed a preliminary assessment of Carter Industries' financial position and operations. Today, I will present our findings and a proposed path forward. For the next hour, I laid out in meticulous detail exactly what had gone wrong and when. I was professional but unflinching, pointing to specific decisions that contributed to the decline. Mark squirmed when I highlighted his failed European expansion. Jason looked down when I mentioned the loss of 3 major clients under his sales leadership. The company currently has a negative cash flow of approximately $2.3 million per month, I concluded. At this burn rate without intervention, Carter Industries will be insolvent within 45 days. A heavy silence filled the room. However, I continued, we believe the company can be saved with immediate, decisive action. I outlined our turnaround plan. Summit Ridge Ventures would provide emergency capital of $50 million in exchange for 60% ownership. There would be a full restructuring of the executive team based on merit, not family ties. Profitable divisions would be sold or shuttered. Manufacturing would be modernized with state-of-the-art technology. Additionally, I said, locking eyes with the board, I will require installation as chairperson with full authority to implement necessary changes without interference. Mark stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. You're talking about a hostile takeover of a family business. I'm talking about saving a family business you've run into the ground," I replied calmly. "The alternative is bankruptcy within weeks. Your choice." "We can find other investors," Mark insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Can you?" I raised an eyebrow. "In time, with these financials, be my guest." Mr. Fitzgerald, the senior board member, cleared his throat. "Mark, perhaps we should seriously consider Ms. Hayes's Ms. Carter's offer. The timeline she presented aligns with our own projections." Mark looked around for support but found little. Even Jason was studiously examining his coffee cup. "This is still a family company," Mark said desperately. "Dad, tell them." All eyes turned to Dad, who had remained silent throughout the presentation. He looked older than his years as he slowly rose. "When I founded Carter Industries," he began, voice steadier than expected, "I had nothing but determination and belief that I could build something worthwhile. Something that would last beyond me." He scanned the room. Somewhere along the way, I confused preserving control with preserving the company itself. He turned to Mark. "Son, I did you no favors making you CEO before you were ready. I set you up to fail because I couldn't let go properly. Then to me and Emily, I failed you by not recognizing your talents when they were right in front of me." The room fell utterly silent. This company bears our name, he continued, but its future matters more than our pride. If Emily and her team can save what we've built, give employees security, and restore Carter Industries to something we can be proud of, then we should be grateful, not defensive. Mark stared at Dad in disbelief. You're taking her side after everything I've done. This isn't about sides, Dad interrupted firmly. It's about survival. While Mark processed this betrayal, Jason, ever the opportunist, stepped forward. I think we should accept Emily's offer. I'm happy to help in whatever capacity is needed. Ryan nodded in agreement. The plan makes sense. It's our best option. Backed into a corner, Mark requested a private conversation with Dad. They disappeared into an adjacent office as the board murmured among themselves. Diane leaned close to me. That went better than expected. It's not over yet, I cautioned. Mark won't surrender control easily. 20 minutes later, Mark and Dad returned. Mark's face was flushed, but his demeanor had shifted. After their discussion, Mark announced stiffly, I've decided to accept Summit Ridge's offer with one condition: I remain on the executive team in some capacity. I considered his request. Keeping Mark involved would be complicated, but outright firing him risked unnecessary resistance. You can remain as VP of Client Relations, I decided. Your institutional knowledge of long-term clients will be valuable during the transition. However, I added this position will have clearly defined performance metrics like every other role in the new structure. Mark clearly hated the demotion, but recognized it was the best offer he'd get. He nodded tersely. With that settled, the board voted unanimously to accept Summit Ridge's investment and my installation as chairperson. Legal documents were signed, press releases drafted, and restructuring officially began. The following weeks were intense. My team and I worked 16-hour days implementing the turnaround plan. We conducted a comprehensive audit of every department, identified salvageable operations, and made tough decisions about what had to go. The first executive meeting under the new structure was predictably tense. Mark sat silently fuming as I outlined changes to reporting structure and accountability standards. Jason adapted quickly, already positioning himself as my trusted lieutenant. Ryan seemed relieved to have his technical expertise finally recognized and valued. From now on, I announced advancement will be based on merit, not family connections. Everyone, including myself, will be held to the same performance standards. Implementation wasn't easy. Longtime employees loyal to Mark resisted the new processes. Some openly questioned my authority despite my official title. Others simply resisted change after years of doing things the Carter way. Mark engaged in subtle sabotage, forgetting to include me on critical client communications, undermining my directives when speaking to his team, spreading rumors that Summit Ridge planned to sell off the company. After catching him in a damaging lie to a major client, I called him into my office, formerly his, which surely fueled his resentment. This stops now, I said, sliding evidence across the desk. I understand this transition is hard for you, but your behavior harms the very company you claim to care about. You have no idea what it's like, he said bitterly. To watch everything Dad built, everything I was supposed to lead, handed over to my little sister, who abandoned us. I didn't abandon the company, Mark. I was pushed out. By you. I let that sink in before continuing. But that's the past. Right now, we have 300 employees depending on us to save their jobs. Can you set aside your ego long enough to help them? Something in my appeal seemed to reach Mark. Not completely, but enough that his active resistance began to soften. Jason, predictably, was like a weather vane, shifting with the winds of power. Once he realized my leadership was firmly established, he became enthusiastically supportive. His sales skills were genuinely valuable when properly directed and monitored, and he thrived under clear guidelines and accountability. The real surprise was Ryan. Given actual authority and resources, he flourished. His technical innovations streamlined manufacturing processes, saving millions in operational costs. He assembled a talented IT team that modernized our outdated systems, improving efficiency company-wide. 6 weeks into the restructuring, we faced a crisis. Our largest remaining client, Henderson Medical Supplies, threatened to take their business elsewhere. The account represented nearly 20% of current revenue. Losing it would be devastating. Mark had cultivated the relationship for years, but Henderson's executives were upset about changes to our quality control procedures. I scheduled an emergency meeting with their executive team, bringing Mark, Jason, and our production manager. "We need this account," Mark stressed before we entered. "Whatever they want, we should give them." "Not if it compromises our new standards," I replied firmly. "We'll listen, but we won't promise what we can't deliver." The meeting began tensely. Henderson's CEO complained about our unnecessary bureaucracy and threatened to walk unless we reverted to previous arrangements. When Mark began to capitulate, I intervened. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your frustration with the changes. Change is difficult for everyone, but let me explain why these new procedures are actually to your benefit." I outlined how enhanced quality controls would reduce defect rates, improve consistency, and ultimately save Henderson money on returns and customer complaints. I shared data from other clients who had already seen improvements and presented a cost analysis showing long-term benefits. Additionally, I added, as a gesture of good faith, we'll extend a 5% discount for the next quarter while we prove the value of these changes. By the end, Henderson agreed to stay and even considered increasing their order volume. As we left, Mark grudgingly admitted, "That was impressive. I've been trying to get them to increase orders for 3 years. Different approaches work in different situations," I replied, not unkindly. "Your relationship got us in the door." My data convinced them to stay. It was our first moment of genuine professional respect. The company's turnaround began gaining momentum. Operational costs dropped by 30% through improved efficiencies and strategic cuts. New clients attracted by our enhanced quality and reliability started signing contracts. Employee morale improved as the company stabilized. Dad attended weekly update meetings, quietly sitting at the back of the room. After one particularly positive session, he invited me to dinner at his house. The family home felt different, less intimidating, more a place of faded memories. We sat in the dining room where countless tense family meals had unfolded. "You've accomplished more in 2 months than Mark did in 10 years, Dad said without preamble. "I had a stronger foundation to start with," I replied cautiously, not wanting to deepen the rift between him and Mark, in a more urgent situation that allowed for dramatic changes. He smiled slightly, always diplomatic when it counted. "Your mother was the same way." Mention of Mom created a moment of shared remembrance between us. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately," he admitted, "wondering what she would think of all this. Of what I did to you." "She would have been disappointed," I said honestly, "but she also believed in second chances." He nodded, staring down at his barely touched dinner. "That's what I'm hoping for. A second chance to be the father you deserved." The words hung between us. "I'd like that," I said finally, "but it will take time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I understand." He hesitated, then added, "Would you consider making these dinners a regular thing? Just to talk. No business." It was a small request, yet monumental in its implications. A first step toward healing what had been broken. "I think I can manage," that I agreed. The following week, I started a new tradition family dinner every Sunday evening. Not mandatory, but open to all Carters. The first few were awkward conversations, stilted and carefully avoiding controversy. But gradually, something shifted. Mark brought his wife and teenage sons curious about the badass aunt they barely knew. Jason actually prepared a dish instead of bringing store-bought food. Ryan arrived early to help set up. During the third dinner, Mark made a self-deprecating joke about his failed European expansion. We froze, unsure how to respond, until I laughed genuinely. The tension broke. Soon, everyone was sharing stories of missteps and lessons learned. For the first time in over a decade, it felt like we might actually become a family again, different from before, with clearer boundaries and expectations, but family nonetheless. 6 months passed in a blur of strategic decisions, operational changes, and careful rebuilding. What had once seemed impossible was now reality. Carter Industries was not just surviving, it was beginning to thrive again. The emergency capital infusion had stabilized our finances, and strategic divestments of unprofitable divisions generated additional cash flow. Most importantly, our renewed focus on quality and innovation restored client confidence and attracted new business. The most significant development came unexpectedly. During a routine review of potential acquisitions, my Summit Ridge team identified surprising synergies between our portfolio companies and Carter Industries' core business. What began as a rescue operation evolved into a strategic merger, with Carter Industries becoming the manufacturing arm of a larger, more diversified operation. The day we announced the formal merger was surreal. I stood at the podium in the company atrium, facing employees from both organizations, my family seated in the front row. Today marks not an ending, but a new beginning, I told them. Carter Industries and Summit Ridge Ventures are stronger together than apart, combining century-old manufacturing expertise with cutting-edge financial and operational strategies. I glanced at Dad, who nodded slightly, pride evident in his eyes. The company's transformation had catalyzed family transformation as well. Mark initially struggled with his diminished role, but eventually found his niche in client relationship management, where his natural charisma could shine without the burden of operational leadership. He'd never be my closest confidant, but we reached a professional respect that seemed impossible months ago. Jason thrived in the new structure, his sales talents amplified by proper support and accountability. Without the pressure to be something he wasn't, he became authentic and effective. Our relationship warmed as he stopped competing and started collaborating. Ryan experienced the most dramatic change. Given resources and recognition, he grew into an exceptional technical director. We discovered a natural sibling shorthand, often finishing each other's sentences during planning sessions. The bond we might have formed as children began growing in adulthood. Dad attended board meetings regularly, despite his health challenges, offering historical context without trying to control outcomes. His doctors reported surprising improvements, attributing it to reduced stress and a renewed sense of purpose. The weekly family dinners evolved from awkward obligations to genuine gatherings. Not always harmonious, we were still Carters after all, but increasingly comfortable. We learned to be a family defined by more than business. One evening, I encountered Mr. Fitzgerald, the senior board member who'd witnessed my humiliation and triumph at an industry event. "I always knew Samuel made the wrong choice," he said, glass of scotch in hand. "I even tried to tell him at the time, but perhaps it worked out for the best. You built something remarkable on your own terms, without the Carter legacy as a crutch or burden." Perhaps I agreed, though I couldn't help wondering how different things might have been. The most meaningful conversation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Dad had asked me to help sort through old company documents in his home office, a task unimaginable a year earlier. "I found something you should have," he said, handing me a worn leather portfolio. Inside was a business plan. A plan I had written at 16, proposing Carter Industries' expansion into medical equipment manufacturing. The very plan he had dismissed as unrealistic, despite its meticulous research and projections. "I kept it all these years," he admitted. "Sometimes I take it out and look at it, especially after you left. The medical division you proposed would have positioned us perfectly for the pandemic boom." He shook his head ruefully, one of many missed opportunities. "We can't change the past," I said, touching the faded pages that held so much youthful hope and subsequent disappointment. "No," he agreed, "but I want you to know, I always saw your potential, Emily. I was just too afraid of being overshadowed to nurture it properly. That was my failure, not yours." Coming from a man who rarely admitted fault, his words carried immense weight. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. Later that week, during our executive leadership meeting, we discussed succession planning. Ironically, the very issue that had driven me from the company a decade ago. "We need clear criteria for future leadership," I explained, "based on merit, skills, and demonstrated capability, not family connections or seniority." Mark, who might once have taken this, personally nodded. "The next generation should earn their positions," he said, glancing at his teenage sons who occasionally interned during school breaks. No shortcuts or assumptions. Exactly, I confirmed. We'll create development tracks for promising employees, family or not, with mentorship, education support, and progressive responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, I reflected on the journey from storage closet to boardroom. The vindication was sweet, but the true victory was healing the ability to lead without anger, to collaborate with my brothers without resentment simmering beneath the surface. I had spent years building Summit Ridge to prove my worth to a family that undervalued me. The irony, true satisfaction came not from proving them wrong, but from creating something that made all our lives better. Success wasn't revenge. It was the freedom to move beyond it. That evening, I stood in my office. Once Dad's briefly, Mark's now legitimately mine, looking out at the manufacturing floor where workers moved with renewed purpose. The Carter name still adorned the building, but its meaning had evolved, no longer a patriarchal kingdom, but a modern enterprise where contribution mattered more than connection. What's the lesson? Being underestimated can be your greatest advantage. Building yourself outside family shadows can forge strength no inheritance provides. Healing doesn't require forgetting the past, but releasing its power to define your future. And maybe the storage room they put you in offers the perfect vantage point to see what needs changing before you emerge to change it. If you followed my journey from being sidelined to leading Carter Industries' revival, I hope it inspires you to believe in your own strength even when others doubt you. I'd love to hear your thoughts and advice in the comments below. How have you overcome moments when people underestimated you? Your support means the world as I navigate this path of rebuilding family and business. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles shape the strongest leaders. Don't let setbacks define you. Instead, use them as fuel to grow led with integrity and create your own legacy beyond expectations.